Kia ora, I'm Richard Hills. I'm a councillor for the North Shore and also the chair of the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee, which is a committee of the whole. It used to be 3 committees and now that's into 1. My political interests, I think, probably happened through school. When I was in high school, the things like the Civil Union Bill, the Prostitution Law Reform, paid parental leave, kind of some big issues were popping up at the time, and we were learning how to do, I think, like select committee submissions and those kind of things at school. And I think I just saw how that you can affect change just by having a voice. And obviously at the time those things passed through Parliament, so it felt like we kind of had a hand in those decisions. So I think that's what piqued my interest. And then later on it was just through community advocacy and realising that there was only kind of older people in elected positions on the council at that time. So I got interested, and then someone asked me to get involved and run for the local board, which I didn't really know what that was at the time. But yeah, then I got elected and here we are. Yeah, so effectively I noticed things in my community were annoying me. Public transport was pretty low bus access on the shore. Back then there wasn't a lot of focus on the environment or climate change, investment into and what I saw were important things in the community. And so I just looked to see figure out what it all meant. And someone, Anne Hartley, who was the mayor of the North Shore some time ago, said to me, why don't you stand with our team for the local board? And I decided quite last minute to stand for the team. It was mostly, I think they were mostly getting me in to do the social media and do that sort of that focus campaign. So they lent me some money and said, if you win, just pay us back. You know, it's quite a lot of money to run a campaign. And then that first time I ran, I got elected, which was pretty awesome. Yeah, so during COVID times, I think in 2020, I led the Te Tātakia Tāwhiti Auckland's climate plan with our sustainability office and all councillors. We worked in partnership with mana whenua, all 19 iwi across Auckland, to prepare the plan and create the plan. Then we put that out to the community and it got good support, and then we got a unanimous support for that around the table. So that was around reducing our emissions by half by 2030, obviously getting our 2050 goals and getting Auckland in line with the Paris Agreement and playing our part. And there's a whole lot of other projects throughout that plan. I think for me, my experience working with young people was a youth worker before this role, and obviously being young once myself. I think what I see still is that it needs to be issue focused, not politics focused. I think that often the media and politicians, especially in Parliament, see it all about the game and the fight and the personalities, whereas I think younger people are more interested in the policies, the direction, how the change might come to the community based on issues, not so much the politics. And I think that's somewhat missing sometimes in our politics, is that it becomes about personalities instead of explaining, you know, what the issue is, whether that's climate change or housing or transport. I think there's a number of things. The postal voting doesn't help. My belief is that most people under sort of 30 or 40 may never have posted a letter in their life, let alone receive mail and then having to post it. There's the issues around that everything is aimed at the ratepayer. So often I think young people or people who may not own a home assume that this is not for them, or only ratepayers can vote. So it's trying to change that language. I think it's also a lot of people feel that they don't know the candidates, or maybe are worried that they're voting for a candidate that doesn't align with their values so much. And maybe just whether they think their vote makes a change. So it's really hard to get people to vote and see that, you know, maybe their vote did make a change the first time, because I think once people see that and think, oh, I voted for that person and they did do what they said, or something I wanted actually ended up happening. But it's getting those people in the first time that's really key, that's really difficult, especially in local government. I think all councillors probably approach the submissions differently, so people definitely read them often with their own slant or assumptions. Me personally, I find it handy to have, it'll get processed. Obviously, if we get 40,000 submissions, there'll be pie charts of who said what, but also beneath that there are themes of what people want, what people don't want. And if I have time, I'll try my best to read through some of the thousands of the submissions, maybe in my local ward or maybe on issues such as climate change, to try and get the flavour of what people are saying. So sometimes the overall data doesn't give you the whole picture of what people are thinking. So it's not a referendum, so obviously submissions end up making up about 2% of the population, so it helps guide your thinking, but you need to be thinking broader than just submissions, because you've got to think about all the people who never submit or didn't know that there was the consultation open. So it's taking some of the advice you've heard, taking what needs to happen or what we can afford, and then using the submissions to help guide some of your thinking. Yeah, so over the last few years, we've tried our best to figure out different ways. So we've got things like have your says now instead of hearings. What we used to require people to do was come into the town hall, travel from all over Auckland, sit around in the room, which isn't very welcoming in my opinion, and then give feedback. Obviously this was during work days and often where a lot of our community weren't able to access that type of contact with the politicians. Now we do more have your say events across Auckland where people can come at night or the weekends or feedback in different ways. It's still not perfect, it needs to change. A lot of what councils have to do is based on legislation, so the future for local government kind of changes that we hope will come, depending on what the government looks like after the election, is that there were some plans to make us have to consult less. So at the moment we're forced to consult along very prescript lines on everything, and I think a lot of people often feel over-consulted, but some of that is because we legally have to. The government can pass a budget literally overnight without talking to anyone, whereas we have to spend 6 months, very specific consultation, very repetitive, asking questions that are around the rates and around things that maybe not everyone is that keen to consult on. And then you have to consult on every project and every change, even down to the yellow lines outside your house, and it becomes like we are kind of asking questions all the time. So not saying we don't want feedback, I think it's good to consult, but how could we make that more friendly? How can you consolidate it? How could you do it maybe every 3 years instead of all the time every year? So yeah, there's much better ways we could be doing it, but a lot of that is required by government onto us, so then it makes it very kind of narrow consultation procedures. So we have voted against doing that. I was on the losing vote of that. I think it was maybe 11 votes to 9, but I think lowering the age for local government at least would allow at least everyone would go through their school, not everyone, but most people would go through their school life voting once, so there's more of a captive audience to enrol, understand how to vote, what local government is. It could be part of civics education. It would also mean that at the moment, if you miss out by a couple months, you turn 18 after an election, you don't vote till you're like 21. It does allow that, you're deciding what to do with your life. It's part of that 16, 17, 18-year-old period where you're thinking about the future, and maybe voting is part of that. So I think it would help. It can't do any harm, in my opinion. We don't have enough people voting for local government as it is. So adding younger people in and hopefully getting those voters early, because there's a lot of research that says, if you vote early, you're probably going to continue to vote. Most people who vote the first time when they're in their teens or younger, they're likely to continue to vote. It's if you keep missing elections, those first 1 or 2, you're less likely to ever come back to voting, especially in local government. Yeah, I think once again, it's hard to know, really. I haven't cracked it myself. I think that we'd have to ask young people. I think that changes throughout time. I know a lot of people my generation and younger tell me that they just don't understand, or they're not interested, or they don't believe that politicians are going to do what they said they're going to do. My kind of vibe is like, vote for the person or the party that you think is most going to do what you do. Of course, every party is going to have things that you don't like and that you do like. But if you can pick a party or a candidate that says things that are closest to what you're thinking or what your kind of focus is for the future, then maybe you can put aside some of the other things you don't agree with. I think it's important to have your say, but I think maybe a lot of young people just think that it won't make a difference, or they don't really know, or they're a bit worried about where their vote might go if they don't know everything about that party or the candidate. Yeah, I think it's everything from submissions to writing letters to the editor, all those old school things which seem, to be quite, for the older generation, are unfortunately a lot where politicians are hearing their feedback from, or they're assuming that one community thinks one thing because a ratepayers association is speaking on the whole community's behalf. So it's kind of looking at being involved through new channels, but also trying to jump into those more traditional channels that maybe young people aren't involved in, because it's kind of self-fulfilling that the candidates and the politicians are only hearing from certain groups, so they keep aiming policies to those certain groups because they think that's all the community wants, and then the people who are already excluded think, oh, they never listen, they only care about that group, and it kind of creates this feedback loop that's really small. So it's how younger people can get into those audiences, whether it's coming to speak to council, emailing, or I get lots of emails and feedback through social media, and we do follow it up. Like, often it could be something small or something that's a bigger issue for the city, but if you're not playing a part or talking to your local representatives, they are hearing from a bigger older group all the time. So it's sort of making sure that you have a responsibility too to give that feedback so that politicians are hearing it, and then over hopefully long term things change, and that younger people feel like the changes they're fed into made a difference. Yeah, so that once again, I think it's we're stuck in these systems of select committees, submissions based on legislation, long, laborious consultation processes that might be done during the day or might be done in a way that younger people aren't able to access it. So I think we do need to change quickly, but once again, it's us all putting the pressure on decision makers like me, but also obviously the decision makers in Parliament to change those things. I remember during the climate strikes, some of that was the most visual ways that younger people were telling people to vote or improve issues across the city and the country for climate. And I have a feeling that maybe some of my colleagues voted for our climate plan because of those climate strikes, like tens of thousands of people standing outside on the street, outside the town hall, demanding action. I felt like maybe some of my colleagues who were not that keen, ended up voting for because they didn't want to disappoint the younger people in their ward. But maybe if those didn't happen, they would have felt comfortable with, I talked to a few people down my street who don't want climate action. So it's sort of being loud, but also, I think voting is really, really important. Obviously, I would say that, but I think if younger people started voting in bigger numbers, they would have more of a say, but it's how you get that collective understanding is the trick. So some of the big projects, obviously the City Rail Link in a couple of years will be open. That's going to transform our city. It'll double the capacity on the rail network, and the current services will be twice as fast from most of the city. So getting around our city, those areas who have access to it will be pretty amazing. We've got the Northwestern busway coming on stream, the Eastern busway. There should be a lot more going on. But some of the little things which are actually quite big, we secured last year $1 billion climate transport targeted rate, and that is focused right across the city in areas that don't have good public transport. So 78 improved routes, 10 new frequent routes. We've already started 2 of those routes, and we're having 4,000 people use those services each day. So showing just by putting it in means that people access it, which is kind of obvious, but I think hopefully those solutions and the spending will show that other politicians and other communities that, look, if we provide good services and we put the money where we say we're going to put it, that people will use it and then obviously reduce their climate impact, but also get around our city in a much more connected way, easier, hopefully faster way to get around. So some of those things are pretty cool. Our electric ferries, our electric buses, we've got almost 150 electric buses. We'll be one of the best in the Australasia for electric buses soon. So those kind of things are pretty cool. Yeah, once again, I think it's focusing on the why we want to do these things, as opposed to just people feel like we're doing change to them. But if it's just simple as making it safer for your kids to walk and cycle to school, a very easy, simple thing to understand, that will obviously reduce the number of cars going, dropping kids off if they know their kids can walk and cycle to school. Public transport, it's shown in the last, pre-COVID, for 10 years we invested really hard in public transport and we almost doubled the number of users per year. So it just shows that when you invest, it works. So we need to get back on top of that. Obviously, if people have an accessible service that's fast, they can turn up, get up. I am very lucky. I live on a really frequent route. I can just walk up to the main road, and there's a bus every 5 minutes in the morning, and it goes really quickly down Oniwa Road and gets to the city within 20 minutes. Everyone should be having that kind of experience. It's not about forcing people out of their cars. It's about showing people there are quicker, faster, hopefully more affordable ways to move around the city. I think what people need to understand, it's not about forcing people out of cars. The investment we're making is to give people more choices. And then, of course, those that do need to use vehicles every day for work or because they like to, or because they've got kids to pick up around the city. If we make public transport, walking and cycling really good and get as many people as possible into those modes, it actually frees up the roads for people who want to drive or need to drive. So it's about trying to make the city better and connected, making the city more, it's about making the city more connected, which also happens to reduce your emissions, which is great, but also makes the air quality better, makes water quality better, and it just makes for a better city. I think if you look at all the comparable cities around the world that maybe a lot of people travel to, you don't ever expect to park outside the Eiffel Tower or park outside of any of the landmarks that are around the world. You go to Venice and you can't drive at all. So you've got all these cities even like Melbourne, who have 18 streets with no cars on them now. It's just quite normal to walk around those areas. And of course you need provision for those with disabilities and how you get access for deliveries and things like that. But I think if you start building a city that is better connected and is for people, then everyone starts to enjoy it. But it's kind of the growing pains at the moment where people get kind of worried about what change looks like. That is the hard thing. But I think if you can show what the outcome is, people then wouldn't look back and go, I wish we had more lanes on this road. I wish we were dividing my community more with car parks. I wish that, Key Street now, there was a lot of opposition to, it was 6 lanes, now it's 2. We added 200 native trees to the area, or the rain gardens, and it's a much nicer space for people. The cars have kind of disappeared, and it's actually, I think people would oppose us now if we wanted to add 4 lanes down there to that space. Yeah, definitely. So when I'm interviewing for candidates for CCOs, those are some of my biggest questions. Do you use the services that you're going to be governing? Do you have a hop card if it's for Auckland Transport Director? How do you move around the city? And I challenge those people when they come back in around how they're experiencing the city. And often they will, say, I will try, or they'll come back to me and say, I used it this way. And, the other day I caught the bus home, and Dean Kimpton, the CEO for Auckland Transport, was on my bus, and we were able to discuss the issues I have with Auckland Transport on the way home. So I think Auckland Transport is actually, they don't have any car parking. They're very focused. All their staff and exec all either walk, cycle, or catch public transport to work. So that's really good. That's a principle for them. But I think it is really crucial that people are understanding how their decisions affect the city and how it affects people. I think that is also for our councillors. I know there's a lot of councillors who don't use the services that they may complain about or they don't want access to. And it's not that easy for everyone. Obviously, it's easy for me. I live on the shore and I have a good connected service, but it's about all of us trying to see what the options are, how can we get across the city better. And I think the more you're in touch with people and more in touch with the problems, and you can pick them up yourselves, then the better and easier those decisions are you have to make long term about what's happening. Obviously, you need to be making sure you don't just make decisions based on your own experience, but it does help to understand the system you're maybe funding or approving. I think it's hard to judge people for why they don't vote, but I guess the issue is that people, especially young people, need to think about if they're not going to vote, other people are still going to vote. So if you're not having a say, you're essentially giving other people your vote as well. So that person's vote is far stronger because you didn't vote. So I guess it's understanding, once again, like who is the best or party that closest aligns to the vision I want for the country, for the policies I want. Even if it's one or two, encourage your friends, encourage your family, go down to vote. Voting will be open for almost 3 weeks this time. So there's not really an excuse about time, but it's just about seeing something in one of the parties or one of the candidates that you like and just putting having your voice be heard. Because in the end of the day, you can be grumpy at all of the offerings and it can be kind of depressing looking at some of the rhetoric out there, this election especially. But I think it's making sure that your voice is heard in the future, because you won't get another chance for 3 years, or some of the things that might happen in the next 3 years might be completely opposed to what you want to happen. But it's really important that you are using your democratic right to have a say. Other people don't have the same opportunities we do in this country. So it's about, today is, I can't say that, but today is suffrage day. In this country, we were the first country where women fought so hard to get the right to vote for other women in this country. And I think, without lecturing people who don't vote, it's really important that we have that opportunity, but also acknowledging that if you don't vote, a whole lot of people that you might not agree with are going to vote anyway. So you may as well try and balance up those views, even if you're not 100% sure you want to back one single issue, one single party. It must be something that's close to what you kind of believe.